Parshas Chukas, one point, and then a little bit what the Rebbe shares with us to align with the time that we are at, Dvar Malchus. So, the Parsha, many Mefarshim deal with it, begins Zot Chukas HaTorah. The Parsha that discusses Para Aduma, the whole process of purifying the dead, the impurity of the dead through the ashes of the red heifer, the red cow. But the Torah is using an expression that is unusual here because when it begins to describe this process of purifying the dead, the impurity of the dead through the ashes of the burnt red cow, it doesn't say Zot Chukas HaPara. This is the law of the red cow, or the cow. Like we learn a Pesach, it says Zos Chukas HaPesach. Or Pasach, I think it's also Chukas HaPesach. Why it says Zos Chukas HaTorah? This is the law of the Torah. You're talking about the red cow. So many things are said and were said and will be said about it, but one of them is that Para Aduma represents the inyan of Chok. And the Torah tells us that, you know what, if we are dealing here with the Chok, that's Chukas HaTorah. This is really not just the Chok of Para Aduma. This is the Chok of the whole Torah. The whole Torah can be represented by the inyan of Chok, of this Chok, of Para Aduma. Para Aduma is the one mitzvah that Shlomo HaMelech said, Achakma v'hi rechoka mimeni. Shlomo HaMelech said, Shlomo HaMelech is the wisest man on earth. He could give 3,000 mishalim for each divine reality, divine truth. According to Bria, Yetzira, Inasiya, 1,000 mishalim each world. Bring it down, down, down. He was so wise. We have no hasaga understanding of his wisdom. And he said, I thought that I am really understanding the Para Aduma, but I realize it's far from me. Para Aduma is a chok. As we know and we heard many times, we have chukim and we have mishpatim. We have laws that make sense. Most of them. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha makes sense. Kabed et avicha v'esimecha, honor your parents, makes sense. Don't steal, makes sense. And so on and so forth. But then we have chukim. Chukim are laws that do not necessarily make sense, transcend our logic. And comes the Torah and tells us that when you approach this mitzvah of Para Aduma, about which King Solomon said, I thought I'm wise enough to get it, but I'm not. It's so far. And not because he had a learning disability, God forbid. he was the epitome of wisdom. But he realized that it's way beyond wisdom, logic, way beyond intellect. And that means that those laws that are called chukim connect us not just with the finite appearance of godliness. It connects us with the infinity of Hashem, the way He transcends our logic. Our logic is limited. And Hashem can and wants to and does and expects us to contain Him in our intellect as well, in our limited receptacles. But for that He has to constrict Himself, His self-expression, and compromise it. But when it comes to a chok, law that doesn't have to make sense, then we are relating to God not on our terms, on His terms, on His unlimited terms. And therefore the impression of those mitzvahs, when we have this kavana, and the Torah comes and tells us in Parshas Chukas, you know what, guys? Zos Chukas HaTorah. This is not just about this mitzvah. This is the effect of the entire Torah. The entire Torah is a chok and has the effect of a chukah, of a chok. What does it mean? When you do the laws of God as mishpatim, you follow rules, divine rules, the way they correlate to your understanding, and the comfort the comfort zone, that how they fit into your comfort zone of your logic and your social needs and so on and so forth. Fine, you are still keeping those mishpatim, those laws, and therefore godliness will come into your heart. But you know how will it come into your heart? It will be like written upon your heart, like ink upon parchment. But when you keep laws of Torah the way you keep para aduma, chok, and you realize that not only para aduma, those chukas HaTorah, all laws, even those that do make sense, are chokim, are an expression of the infinite, are infinite expressions of the divine will, even though we think we understand. Then how does it affect your heart? Chok, hakika means it's carved, it's engraved in your heart. Godliness in this case is engraved in your heart. And that reveals the Yechida Shebanefesh. That reveals the infinite love to Hashem that is innately as a pilot fire always there in a Jewish heart, never can be put out. So those chukas, therefore, one of the ways to answer this question is, it's not just chukas hapara. The chukas haPesach was chukas haPasach. It all the laws of Pesach. Here, yes, is the laws of the chok of para aduma, which is the greatest chok in terms of dealing with tuma, which is itself completely super logical spiritual condition. But comes our Parsha and tells us, don't just relate to it as a single mitzvah, zos chukas hapara. Relate to it as zos chukas haTorah. The whole Torah we should perceive like that. Any command, any halacha, any law, even the mishpatim, the edus, the mishpatim, they are all like chukim. They are all, the way we approach them, they are all the infinite divine will and divine light that we are bringing down, like the limbs of the king. Each one, when you pull his arm, his hand, you pull him, you bring him down here to this world. And that is those chukas haTorah. And now we will conclude with few points from Dvar Malchus of this week that the Rebbe shares with us. How do you make it short? This week is identical to the last conversation that the Rebbe had with us in a revealed way about our Parsha, Nun Aleph, when the Kvius was the same Kvius. The Rebbe was speaking on Shabbos, Yud Tammuz. So this Shabbos will be, today's Zayin Tammuz, this Shabbos will be Yud Tammuz. So it is the 10th, which means the Yud of, it means that, so it's the day of the week with Shabbos, the 7th, and in the month is the 10th. And the Rebbe says that we need to pay attention to the fact that there is an essential difference between counting weekly and counting monthly. The weekly counting is not at all depending on humans. It depends on the way Hashem set up things through Sheshet Yemei Bereshis, from the onset of creation. and it all remains in correlation to the orbit and the movement of the sun. Every time the sun sets, another day passes. And then until Shabbos, and this is how it was set up by Hashem. This is not the case regarding the days of the month. The days of the month are fixed according to a Jewish court. They establish when is the beginning of the month, and therefore when the holidays take place, and depends on humans to make this decision. So what do we find? That chronologically or historically, the 7 days of Bereshit that are connected to the movement of the sun were there set up right from the onset of creation, says the Rebbe. However, the mitzvah of setting up the months began only after Bnei Israel came out of Egypt, of Mitzrayim. In other words, says the Rebbe, the days of the week represent the natural order of creation by a God. And the days of the month, which is called Chodesh, Mileshon Chidush, to innovate, represents the Chidush, the innovation, the new addition, the new energy, the new consciousness, the new reality, the new spirit, the new light that human can bring into creation by bringing down godliness, which is higher than the world, into this world, all the way to the final complete state of the world that will be permeated with godliness and with the knowledge of God in the complete Geula. And the Rebbe says this difference between the energy of the 7, which means the order of nature, of creation, and the energy of the 10, of the addition that human brings into the Chodesh, into the avodah of the month, the Chidush, the new energy that humans bring. This is especially emphasized this coming Shabbos, when it will be Shabbos, the 7th day, and it will be the 10th of Tammuz, the 10th of the month. Because Shabbos represents the completion of creation, the 7th day, the completion of the 7 midos, divine midos, and the 10th represents the shleimus, the shleimus, the completeness that is created through the service, the avodah, the labor of men. Why 10? Because that's the status, that's the koma, the stature of men, the 10 spheros. Atzilus, which are the 10 spheros, Chabad, Chagas, Nehim, are called the Adam HaElyon, the divine men. So the 10 represents what the human brings into, through his avodah, through his conscious service, what he brings into creation. Both of them together, the 7 and the 10, add up to 17. And 17 is Gematria, all of you know, Tov, which is good. The Rebbe says that it's also reflected in the Torah. Our Torah is made out of these 2 parts. The written Torah that was given from above is not shaykh for a person to add anything or to change anything, to change it in any way. It has to remain the way it's written. And that represents the shleimus of creation of the world through the 7 midos, divine midos. On the other hand, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, emphasizes more the addition that man adds and innovates in Torah through the rules of Torah. And therefore, in that is emphasized the completion that is made through Avodas HaAdam, the 10 spheros that include the Moichin and the Midos. In each one, the 7 and the 10, there is a Maila, there is an advantage over the other. The advantage of the 7 is that it indicates the completion of creation the way God made it. And God does things perfectly. The natural shleimus, the inner shleimus that exists in creation because it's made by and run by God. So there is something that is very solid there. However, the advantage of the 10 is that it reveals through the avodah of person, through the initiation and the investment and the labor and the conscious work of human, it is revealing the Elokus, the divine presence which is higher than creation. Lemala min abriya, the Rebbe calls it. The divine revelation which is higher than even the godliness that comes into the creation on Shabbos. Even higher than Shabbos, says the Rebbe. This is the enormous, wonderful Maila that is present in this date where we are finding ourselves, said the Rebbe, that Shabbos, the 10th of Tammuz, coming up this Shabbos. Because on this day, both the 7th and the 10th are united together. So there is the Gilui Eloki shelemala legamri min ha'olam. There is a divine revelation which is completely higher than the world. Nevertheless, it permeates the world in its pnimius, because it's also the 10. This Maila is in every day of the days of the month, but especially on the 10th. And therefore the connection of the 7 and the 10th creates together 17, which is Tov. And all this, says the Rebbe, is connected to the Shabbos coming after the Shabbos, which will be Yud Zayin Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz. Yud Zayin Tammuz, even though it's a day of mourning and fasting, it's a Yom Tov. As we can see in the date itself, Yud Zayin is Gematria Tov, is good. It is a day of fasting, but it's called Yom Ratzon Le'avai. In the Torah, it's called a day of will, of goodwill to God. The cause of the fasting is negative, it's true. But the mashal that the Medrash brings is like a king who himself washes his little son, the child that got filthy. Sometimes it helps the child a little bit when he has to wash him from his filth, because he loves him so much, he wants to clean him completely. But so lichora, externally the child is uncomfortable, but really it's tov, it's a good thing. But when Yud Zayin Tammuz, like this year, occurs on Shabbos, we don't even fast. The opposite. It's a mitzvah to me'aneg the Shabbos, to make Shabbos enjoy itself, to have pleasure on Shabbos, by achila u'shtia, but especially by eating and drinking. So Shabbos, not this Shabbos, the Shabbos that is blessed from this Shabbos, the Shabbos following, is such a unique Shabbos. Why? Because there are 2 miles in it. Number one, the mitzvah of every Shabbos. The revealed good on Shabbos, because of which every Shabbos we have to have good time, and we don't have to worry that the achila on Shabbos has klipa in it, even though The Hasidim saw the image of an ox wearing shtreimel eating cholent on Shabbos, but generally it says that there is no klipa attached to eating on Shabbos. Everybody should judge themselves and maybe favorably, but in any case, you have this coming next Shabbos two inyan, two miles. Number one, the Shabbos itself, the good of Shabbos itself, when you can, your mitzvah to connect with Tainug without any concerns. You don't have to guard it, because it's Shabbos. And then you also, this Shabbos, it's so special because you'll also have the inner Tov of Yud Tammuz. Usually we don't see the inner Tov of Yud Tammuz because we experience the outer appearance of Yud Tammuz. It's a day of mourning, it's a day of fasting, it's a day of prayers, supplications, and so on and so forth. We feel the external aspect, the darker aspect. But when Yud Tammuz is on Shabbos, we can, all the external of the fasting and the negativity is off, and what is remaining? The Tov of Yud Tammuz. So we have double Tov next Shabbos. The Tov of Shabbos and the Tov together with the revealed Tov of Yud Tammuz itself, it is Gematria Tov. And this Shabbos is Bichlal the Shleimus Abriya, the Shle Tov, and this is Tov Shebetov, and therefore, and all this is coming because of this Shabbos. This Shabbos is Mimeno Mizbarchim Kulu Yomin. As the Arizal said, that Hashem only created the world with energy for 6 days. It's from Shabbos, the first day, 6 days. It's from Shabbos that the next 6 days are getting their energy. So too from the onset of creation. It is Shabbos that is the intermediate, the bridge between the provider of the energy. It's also a bridge, but also between God, Oisi, it's a bridge, it's a bridge between Beni Uvein Bnei Israel. But Shabbos, in terms of time, is the source of blessing for the coming week, including the coming Shabbos. So this Shabbos, which is the 10th of the month, so we have also already the 17, the 10 and the 7, from which Shiva Asar B'Tammuz this year is blessed. And so too the Rebbe says we should have in mind regarding the breaking of the luchos, of the tablets that occurred on the 17th of Tammuz. That really, as a result of the breaking of the first ones, we got much more in terms of Torah in the second. And so too in our Parsha, says the Rebbe, Parshas Chukas, we can find these two kinds as well. The mitzvah of Para Aduma in the Parsha, as we discussed, is called Zois Chukas HaTorah, even though we are talking about a specific mitzvah. And one of the reasons is, I said that there are many reasons, but another reason the Rebbe brings here is this mitzvah includes both general directions that are required from a person in fulfilling Torah and mitzvahs. How so? On one hand, we should want to always exit from the world, from the limitations of the world, and become one with God. The world is like weights, it's like a jail. We always yearn to be free from this world. And on the other hand, we have to do our service of bringing godliness into this world, dafka in this world and in the categories of time and space and so on. And this is exactly the difference between the Maila of the 7th and the 10th. The direction of leaving behind limitations of the world is connected to the 10, because the 10 reveals through human godliness which is higher than the world, and the direction of serving God within the world is connected to the 7, which represents the completion of the creation by God. We have the same thing in the revealed and hidden part of Torah, and so too concludes the Rebbe, in the avodah of every Jew. On one hand, we have the avodah with our guf, refining our body, which has to consider the limitations of the body. And then we have the avodah of revealing our soul, which is boundless and endless. But in the avodah of revealing the soul, we also have the external aspect of the soul and the more conscious, and the internal, the more superconscious, which is not limited, and we have to reveal it to as well. In Torah and mitzvahs, we have also the nigle and the pnimius, and we have to be engaged in Torah and mitzvahs, both dimensions. And therefore, says the Rebbe is suggesting, and when the Rebbe suggests for us is a command, that each and every one should add something in learning as he can, one subject in nigle, and one subject, which means one subject in the legal aspect of Torah, and one subject in the mystical aspect of Torah, in Hasidus, and you should do that be'iyun, with thoroughly, and especially a subject that connects the nigle with Hasidus together, and which can be mostly found, the Rebbe says, very much found in the Torah of our Rebbeim, the Hasidus of the Torah of our Rebbeim. And the Rebbe said that in the fulfilling of the mitzvahs, we should also add the soul, the neshama in the mitzvahs, the hidur, the kavana. We should not add only in the performance, but also in the intention. And the Rebbe gives example, and by this I'm concluding, dear ladies, the mitzvah of tzedakah. It's true that halachically, that legally, it doesn't matter what is the intention of the giver if the receiver received. Even if the giver lost the money, he performed the mitzvah of charity. However, says the Rebbe, we know that the mitzvah of tzedakah, of charity, can only be complete and whole when it is done with a good countenance, b'me'or panim, with a radiating face. And therefore it's very important, says the Rebbe, that together with the increasing of charity in actuality, there should be also an increasing in the soul of the performance of this mitzvah, the shining of the face and the beautifying of this mitzvah when we interact with any receiver. And so too, not only regarding money or food or physical objects that we can give to those who, God forbid, are deprived and are in a state of need, but also regarding tzedakah in speech, charity and kindness and generosity in speech, to give a good advice to the other, to speak good words about the other. And also, the Rebbe says, charity in thought, to think good thoughts about the other. Charity in our thoughts. And we should affect others to do the same. And towards Chag HaGeula, the celebration of the Yontif of redemption, which makes the whole month to become and called the Chodesh HaGeula, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel Tammuz, of the liberation of the previous Rebbe. The Rebbe said we should prepare and conduct Farbrengens in connection to Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz, also the birthday of the Frierdiker Rebbe, or both, and in which we should strengthen each other to add in Torah and mitzvahs and spreading the wellsprings. And the main thing is that right away the true and complete Geula should come through the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach, and Yud Zayin Tammuz will come, Sasan, Simcha, Moadim Tovim, as the Rambam says, that these are all Yamim Tovim. And even now, Bizman HaGalus, there are so many miracles that when we are asked, What's the latest miracle you saw? You will say, well, latest? I cannot even stop here. They're coming one after the other, says the Rebbe. And therefore, and the main thing is that immediately the Geula should come, and all of us, all Bnei Israel in all generations, fly on Ananim, on the heavenly clouds, to Eretz Yisrael, to Yerushalayim, and to the third Beis HaMikdash. And the whole world should celebrate it with us. Be'ezras Hashem.